Senators shouted at them in the street, and a large proportion said they'd also been groped or grabbed inappropriately in public. The bleep covers obscene, sexually explicit comments which were shouted at me.
This is a piece of work that needs to happen now, and I think it will do a lot to increase women's safety and women's feelings of safety in Nottinghamshire.
Lost in the somewhat extraordinary events of the past few weeks, not least of which were the terrorist attack in Nice, France, and the coup in Turkey, was what I would describe as a less than subtle change in policing in a fairly unremarkable county in the UK, which may have some unfortunate implications not only for local men, but quite possibly for men nation and worldwide as well. As you may have surmised from the intro video, unwanted dating propositions and wolf whistling, or catcalling, are now being recorded along with other much more serious offenses like groping or sexual assault as hate crimes. That's right, tap a woman on the shoulder or call to her in the streets of Nottinghamshire in order to ask her out or something along those lines. And if she reports it to the police as an unwanted advance, it will now be recorded as a hate crime. Now, being a Yank, you may be asking yourself why the hell I care what one measly little county in the UK treats as a hate crime. Well, I probably wouldn't, except the proponents of this new policy are pushing to spread it throughout the country.
This is a national issue. This isn't just a Nottingham or Nottinghamshire issue, but we faced into it and said, right, that's enough.
Add to that push the fact that American women have for years now been advocating for catcalling laws in U.S. cities and for putting catcalling on par legally with hate speech, and I don't think it's a stretch to assume this hate crime policy in little old Nottinghamshire, UK, will spread beyond not just county but national borders as well. Criminalizing catcalling is bad enough, in my opinion. Classifying it as a hate crime is off-the-charts Orwellian bullshit that could set in motion some truly troubling anti-democratic changes in our otherwise free society. Especially when you consider that only the catcalling or wolf whistling aimed at females, of course, will be considered as much. Now, StopStreetHarassment.org claims that many, if not all, of the 50 U.S. states already have some form of law to address street harassment or catcalling, but a brief scan of those laws listed in its PDF indicated to me at least that those regulations are less concerned with catcalling specifically and more targeted at eliminating solicitation of prostitution, threats of violence, physical intimidation, and things along those lines. And any push for laws targeting catcalling specifically is largely a recent event for which we have Western women to thank. Even if my brief scan of those laws failed to give me the proper impression of catcalling's lasting legacy in U.S. law, there is still a drastic difference between making it a minor or misdemeanor offense and what's taking shape in Nottinghamshire. I think all reasonable people will agree that a misdemeanor is a world apart from a hate crime. We only need to look at a couple articles from the BBC and The Guardian to figure out what's going on here. So as always, I will link to them along with all my sources in the video description below. Just a note, I'll probably only be reading from the Guardian article because that has much more information than the BBC article, just using the BBC article for images and videos. Before I start reading that article, I want to draw everyone's attention to the images used in these articles, because I don't think it's a coincidence that both depict attractive young women suffering, shall we say, some sort of unwanted physical contact. The intent of these images is much the same as the intent of cataloging unwanted verbal interactions with much more serious crimes like sexual assault, and then stamping it all hate crime. The BBC and The Guardian, and Nottinghamshire police as well, want to blur the lines between men simply asking for dates, or asking for sex even, or making naughty comments about short skirts or something like that, and more serious things like physical contact, sexual assault, and even rape. The implication being that if society allows men to say, "Hey baby, nice ass," to women in public, the next thing you know, men will be grabbing women by the shoulders or arms and spinning them around to get their undivided attention, as is depicted in these images. And then they'll be groping their breasts and genitals, which these publications would try to show you if good taste didn't prohibit it. And before you know it, they'll be flat out throwing them down on the ground and raping them before all the witnesses, one would presume, are present in such public situations. The fact that Nottinghamshire isn't already inundated with these more serious sexual assault crimes and seems to be taking forever to devolve into open rape-fest mayhem or to become the rape capital of the world or whatever, you'd figure to be a state of affairs which might give law enforcement pause. I mean, hey baby, nice ass was never considered a hate crime previously, right? So what difference labeling it as such now will make remains a mystery to me, at least. Maybe men only recently got the memo from harassment headquarters to begin Operation Sexual Escalation or something, I don't know. Anyway, right off the bat, the BBC and The Guardian are trying to paint a rather vivid image in everybody's mind that this policy is necessary because paying attention to historical trends within the community and the actual crime statistics and setting policy accordingly would just be crazy, I guess. Nope, you have to police based on irrational female fears that everything's going to escalate out of control and their confusion regarding male behavior and intentions. As the saying goes, feels not reals. Okay, with no further ado, let's get into this Guardian article. Uninvited sexual advances and unwanted verbal contact with a woman, including catcalling or wolf whistling in the street, are to be recorded as hate crimes in a new effort to tackle sexist abuse. Nottinghamshire Police has expanded... okay, let me sidetrack for a second here. If anything could cause another war between America and the UK, I'm pretty sure it'd be differences in opinion on how to conjugate verbs that follow collective nouns. But I digress. Nottinghamshire Police have expanded their categories of hate crime to include misogynistic incidents, characterized as behavior targeted towards a victim simply because they are a woman. They are a woman because she is a woman. Come on, Guardian, at this point I'm pretty sure you're using this aggravating grammar just to cover up the fact that Nottinghamshire Police seemingly could give a fuck if men are victims of hate crimes. This means incidents ranging from street harassment to unwanted physical approaches can be reported to and investigated by the police, and support put in place for victims. The force is the first in the country to adopt the separate misogyny hate crime category and has provided specific training to selected officers in the past 3 months. Nice. So Nottinghamshire taxes, as well, are the first in the country to be used to take selective enforcement to a whole new level. Police will be trained to be biased and to give special attention and treatment to women at the expense of men. All on the taxpayer's dime. Wonderful. Commenting on the new procedures introduced in partnership with Nottingham Women's Centre, I guess that must mean Chief Constable. Chief Constable Sue Fish said, "I'm delighted that we are leading the way towards tackling misogyny in all its forms. It's a very important aspect of the overall hate crime work being conducted and one that will make Nottinghamshire a safer place for all women. What women face, often on a daily basis, is absolutely unacceptable and can be extremely distressing." Yeah, I don't have any crime statistics for Nottinghamshire specifically, but I do know that according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, men in every country are more likely than women to be the victim of homicide, and that would include the UK, obviously. It's absolutely unacceptable that Chief Constable Fish probably doesn't even know this, and therefore fails to go out of her way to comment on how extremely distressing that reality is for men. Work on the change began in June 2014 after a research project, which led on to a conference at which women gave examples of harassment they had faced. How about some links to this research in this conference, Guardian? You know, maybe so UK taxpayers can check to see if their hard-earned money funded more bullshit slanted feminist research and also paid for police to be brainwashed by it. Fish encouraged anyone affected by misogynistic hate crime to contact police without hesitation. The work we are doing with Nottingham Women's Centre is so valuable, and I'm looking forward to continuing that work, she added. Well, there's a nice big fat clue there. Let me see if I can find anything about this online. There we are. Okay, this is a post by the Nottinghamshire Police themselves. Okay, very good. Street harassment against women and its potential to make gender-based violence acceptable in society was the focus of a national conference held in Nottinghamshire yesterday, 24th of September 2015. Police experts, psychologists, and women's rights campaigners attended Nottingham Trent University to examine varying types of misogynist behavior towards women in public places, from catcalls and wolf whistles to violence and sexual assault. The Safer for Women Summit, organized by the Nottingham Women's Centre and funded by Nottinghamshire Police and Crime Commissioner Paddy Tipping, featured powerful testimonies from women who have been affected by gender-based street harassment and focused on different settings for the problem, including the nighttime economy and sexism on campus. Well, there you go. That solves the big mystery, eh? The UK public pays the police, and the police last September decided to burn that money on the altar of feminism and to fund its own brainwashing by gender propaganda so that it could be better trained to ignore issues in crime that affect men. Wonderful, once again. Melanie Jeffs, the manager at the center, said, "We're pleased to see Nottinghamshire Police recognize the breadth of the violence and intimidation that women experience on a daily basis in our communities. Understanding this as a hate crime will help people to see the seriousness of these incidents and hopefully encourage more women to come forward and report offenses." The Nottinghamshire Force defines a hate crime as any incident which may or may not be deemed as a criminal offense, which is perceived by the victim or any other person as being motivated by prejudice or hatred. And now the Nottinghamshire Force also includes in that definition of hate crime harmless day-to-day occurrences like asking a woman out on a date, thanks to being bamboozled by feminists who spend every waking moment of their lives figuring ways to portray themselves yet again as victimized by the slightest offense so that they can then reap the rewards of public victim bucks, like those that flow from unwitting taxpayers through gullible, sympathetic police departments right into their feminist coffers. Nice work if you're female and you can get it. Men need not apply, however. But remember, men are the sexist ones, filled with hatred for daring to ask women out on dates in public. Domestic abuse is not included within the scope of misogyny hate crime, as it is dealt with under its own procedures. Yeah, why would you classify beating your spouse or children as a hate crime when you can classify asking a woman out on a date or for sex as such? But you can spare us the bullshit, because had Nottinghamshire Police decided to include domestic abuse in this new categorization, husbands would be left out in the cold, I'm sure. Well, unless they dared, after getting a beating, to mope up to their wives to try to patch things up. Because if their wives then decided these approaches were unwanted, they'd be guilty of hate crimes, right? Misogyny hate crime is classed under the new policy as incidents against women that are motivated by an attitude of a man towards a woman and includes behavior targeted towards a woman by men simply because they are a woman. What the fuck did I just read? How the fuck do you logically institute any coherent policy based on that indecipherable run-on nightmare? What a fucking mess. And this is policy in Nottinghamshire now. Unbelievable. Examples of such incidents may include unwanted or uninvited sexual advances, physical or verbal assault, unwanted or uninvited physical or verbal contact. There's that shiny phrase again, verbal contact, this time with verbal assault thrown in for good measure. You have got to be fucking kidding. If this word choice isn't straight out of the Ministry of Truth's doublespeak handbook, then I don't know what is. Uninvited physical or verbal contact or engagement and use of mobile phones to send unwanted or uninvited messages or take photographs without consent. Look, I don't know what UK laws are regarding taking photographs of people in public. I mean, with security cameras covering every goddamn inch of London, I assume they're pretty lenient. But it is perfectly legal here in the US, even if you do not get their consent beforehand. For some reason, many people seem to think it's illegal, and this misconception leads to strange confrontations, such as the one a few years ago where a young man flying his drone with a camera on it over a beach provoked some woman into violence because she got a bug up her ass over it and ended up assaulting him.
I'm gonna beat your ass, you little motherfucker.
Can someone call the cops? I'm being assaulted!
But whatever the UK laws are regarding public photography, I'm pretty sure we can all agree, even if it's frowned upon or even if it's illegal, the problem is making it a hate crime. Because that's as fucking absurd as making unwanted verbal contact a hate crime. Last year, a building firm was investigated by police after a 23-year-old woman, Poppy Smart, reported men wolf whistling at her in the street. Poppy Smart, huh? I'm actually supposed to believe that's a real name. Now, I know you Brits like to name your daughters after flowers and plants and shit, but the poppy plant? Seriously? Anyway, let's click on that link and have a look-see at how inane and aggravating it's going to be and how overwrought Poppy's reaction to being catcalled was. A 23-year-old digital marketing coordinator has reported a group of builders to the police for sexual harassment. Every morning on her way to work, Poppy Smart faced gestures, disrespectful comments, and wolf whistles. The builders would even come out of the site to whistle as she passed them, and on one occasion, one of the men deliberately blocked her path. Yeah, As hysterical as all of this is getting, I ain't buying it. He was probably just crossing the street to get the crew its morning coffee and crossed in front of Poppy, and then complimented her ass or something as she went by, and now he was blocking her path. I mean, God forbid Poppy had to slightly sidestep to get around him. And how pathetic is it that left-leaning news outlets are still trying to act like these things only happen to women? Now, I can't show you even a few seconds of that infamous video where the male model gets catcalled, because YouTube is waging an all-out copyright war on fair use. But so many people have seen it by now that I'm pretty sure only a couple screen captures here will suffice to get the point across. Smart described the behavior as incredibly intimidating and said it had led her to consider changing her route to work, something people do quite often to avoid people they don't like or conversation with them. But we must remember these little people aren't ridding the street of hate crime like Super Poppy, so they can afford to do something so obvious and simple like avoiding one particular city block on their way to work. After a month, she reported the behavior both to the firm who employed the men and to the police. The police investigated, but dropped the case when Smart was satisfied it had been handled internally. Right, so the firm probably suspended or fired these men, so Poppy got her pound of flesh and exercised her power over male grunts and therefore was very, very happy. Nice privilege to be able to get men fired or arrested simply for saying things you don't appreciate, you know? Depending upon your mood that day, of course. Because maybe you'd like to get them fired and arrested if you've got a serious raging case of PMS going on. And of course, societal institutions like companies and the police should kowtow to your mood, whatever it is that day. While the matter was dropped when Smart was satisfied it had been handled internally by the firm, okay, The Guardian repeating itself a little bit here from the linked article, it was believed to be the first time police had investigated wolf whistling as a potential crime. Well, congratulations, Poppy, on the Orwellian achievement. So brave of you to stand up to compliments with some naughty words in them. Rachel Chris, co-coordinator of the End Violence Against Women Coalition, said, "It is great that police in Nottingham will be capturing the way a lot of harassment in public spaces is targeted at women and girls. In a recent poll, we found that 85% of women aged 18 to 24 have experienced unwanted sexual attention in public places, and 45% have experienced unwanted sexual touching, which can amount to sexual assault." Yeah, just more blurring of the rather distinct lines everyone keeps in their heads between, everyone sane that is, keeps in their heads, between asking someone out for a date or for sex and flat out assaulting them. Okay, I think we've all gotten an earful of this Orwellian bullshit. Let me wrap things up here and give some closing thoughts. Since 99.99999% of interactions between male and female strangers in public are of the verbal variety, it really doesn't help the female persecution complex much if such encounters are treated as harmless or just irritating at times. If you're going to play the permanent victim routine in a world with declining violent crime, you need to elevate nonviolent encounters into something like hate crime, or you risk starving your cash cow. I mean, let's take a look once again at the video from the BBC article.
The bleep covers obscene, sexually explicit comments which were shouted at me.
Does this reporter woman show any signs of being the victim of an actual hate crime? She hardly looks annoyed, and I swear for a moment there she was going to smile at what was obviously intended as a purposeful troll of some histrionic and mincing reporting. She's not cringing or flinching, she's not bringing her arms up to defend herself, she's not running away. None of her body language suggests she feels unsafe, let alone that she was just the victim of a fucking hate crime. So this bullshit about this new hate crime policy being about women's safety or helping them feel safe in public spaces is just that, bullshit. In addition to the obvious benefit of keeping the victim bucks flowing, if society can be convinced to demonize what is nothing more than a nuisance, and it should be clear here that when I say, quote, nuisance, unquote, I mean, quote, verbal contact, unquote. I mean that part of the equation. Obviously, we all know everyone should be free from unwanted physical contact and assault, the actual touching bit, so that all goes without saying. So when we look past feminists cashing in on everything being treated as a hate crime, and consider the motivations of regular women, for lack of a better term, women who make money in, shall we say, more honest ways, rather than by wearing their feminism on their sleeves and holding out their panhandling cups. If we look at why they agree with this hate crime policy, the issue for these women is the irritation of having to turn down icky propositions all the time. Anything that limits that inconvenience seems like a great idea to these women, because most of them don't really bother to consider the impacts on basic rights in a democratic society. They don't think that far into it. A lot of them at this point probably think dating should be kept to Tinder and Match.com anyway, because it makes weeding out undesirable men much easier for them. And I seriously doubt, if given the choice, that they'd prefer to run the risk of giving the impression that they attract, quote, losers, unquote, or look like ballistic bitches turning down the, quote, creepy guys, unquote, if more desirable men are present to witness this awkward interaction. Anyway, the point is, no society that considers itself progressive, in the free-thinking and modern sense now, not in the social justice sense, none of these societies will put one gender's irritation above the rights of free expression for everybody else. We should all be free to make asses of ourselves and to offend people with naughty words and propositions in public spaces if we so choose without legal repercussions. At the very least, without cops categorizing it as hate crime, because actual arrests will inevitably follow from such stat-taking. You know this will happen. When bureaucracy and feminism combine forces, the result is never good for men. Okay, one final thought here on demographic decline before I bring this video to a close. As a Western male, you are truly damned if you do and damned if you don't anymore. I mean, think about it. If you go MGTOW and leave women alone altogether, you're considered part of some hate group. But if you approach women in public with romance in mind, well, now you might be guilty of a hate crime. The irony here is that the Western world is bemoaning the demographic decline, but continues to demonize male behavior that might correct this plummeting birth rate situation. Every organism that reproduces sexually is going to depend on mate-seeking behavior that may be somewhat less than perfect. And last I checked, humans don't reproduce asexually. And you can tell me all you want that this mate-seeking behavior has to be controlled to minimize the icky impacts and to maintain a civilized society. But the second you start policing the harmless verbal form of that mate-seeking behavior in order to pacify the overactive fifis of women you will never satisfy anyway, no matter how draconian you make your laws, You have just stepped over the line and begun to shoot yourself in the foot as a society and all but guarantee the demographic decline you claim to be trying to avoid. But who am I fooling? You already have the cure for the demographic decline all figured out, right?
The maddening thing here is Europe doesn't even need to do this for good reasons. It can do it for selfish ones, because as a continent, it is in dire need of new citizens.
According to the UN, the average woman needs to have 2.1 children to maintain the population of a developed country. But in the European Union, every single country is below that 2.1 level. By 2050, some countries like Greece, Portugal, and Germany will see their populations drop by double-digit percentages, according to Pew.
That's true. If Europe doesn't open its doors to more migrants, this is not the changing face of Europe they should be frightened of. This is. This one right here.
Some jokes are well thought out, others not so much.